Right then, hello. My name's Irene McIntosh. I am a PhD student at the University of the West of Scotland, looking at digital inequality, and I am very delighted to be joined by two of my colleagues from Govan Housing Association today. I have got the effervescent Ryan Davidson, who is a CLD practitioner with a background in youth work and management. He currently works as a community inclusion officer for Govan Housing Association, overseeing the community-based programme. And he's been responsible for planning, managing, and evaluating all of the priorities, including Govan Housing Association's social employability and digital programmes. And during lockdown, Ryan was involved in bringing the Govan partnership together and coordinating responses based on needs. Hello, Ryan, and he is chummed along by Rory. Sorry, Ryan, say hello.
I was just going to say hello.
After that massive
I'm still laughing at
intro.
effervescent.
I know. Well, I need a good one for you as well, Rory. Equally as effervescent. Is that good, you know? So we've got Rory Brownwood, who's also a CLD practitioner, currently working as a community inclusion assistant with Govan Housing Association, running the digital inclusion programme. For the past 4 years, Govan Housing Association's been running a programme for tenants in the wider Govan area, which includes a totally brilliant digital hub, an amazing digital lending library for tenants and community groups, and he's been convening a local digital forum. During COVID-19, Govan Housing Association also was part of the pilot for No One Left Behind, which then evolved into the Connecting Scotland programme. And during that part of the pilot, those guys deployed over 300 devices and data to the local community. And the backstory is, I guess, that we've been working together for ages since pre-pandemic. I feel like I've already been talking too much myself. So I guess the question I have for you both, and we haven't got a sort of Bagsy situation sorted out about who's going to talk first, but do you want to tell us a bit about Govan Housing Association and specifically the kind of stuff you were doing pre-COVID about digital inclusion? Because that's really how we ended up working together, was the pre-COVID digital inclusion situation.
Yeah.
Who's going?
I suppose the starting point, I'll go myself, yeah. I suppose the starting point for us was back when the community inclusion team was formed 5 years ago. And I was in post on my own, and it was kind of looking at ways of engaging with tenants in the wider community and working with partners to develop projects that met the needs of our local tenants and residents. And part of that was to look at digital inclusion. It was starting to become quite a big thing. The housing associations had been chatting about it for a while, but never really had that area of expertise or somebody who could lead on that from the front line. So we had worked with some of the local partner organisations that had digital provision on offer, very basic digital provision. And the aim was to develop a digital participation strategy, a very simple strategy that was about mapping the area, looking at the resources that existed, looking at places like cafes and community buildings that had free Wi-Fi, mapping those out, trying to promote that and increase participation. And then when we increased the participation, it was using that engagement that we had with service users across the board to tease out what those needs were and what the issues were and any potential barriers to participation. So we commissioned a digital project at the time to go into the community and do pop-up stalls and promote what was happening and get organisations involved and get the local community to kind of engage to feed in terms of their experiences and what their knowledge was on the area. And then we collated all the information that we had got. We devised a leaflet that was getting sent out to every property in Govan that told them where they could go for support, advice, where they could access devices, where they could access the internet, where they could print. We learned that printing and scanning services was a massive need within the community. And from that, we had decided to open the digital hub space, the digital hub in Govan Road, which is part of our kind of community inclusion programme, and just have generic drop-in access for people to come in and use computers. And that was the basis, that was the kind of starting point for our full digital inclusion programme, and it kind of grew to meet the needs as we went on. The associations, as it went on, were looking at, how do we make this an area of expertise, if you like, and bring in somebody who had that experience, who could deliver and grow the project. And that was when we recruited Rory as a digital inclusion worker as part of the Scottish Government's People and Communities Fund. And the aim was always to get Rory in, embed them into the full wider programme, because our programme incorporates social inclusion, digital inclusion, financial, health and wellbeing, education programmes, integration programmes, etc. So part of it was to see, can we get Rory to integrate and embed himself within that programme, start to promote and grow the digital projects. And it was a kind of view of the housing associations recognising the risk to the business with things like universal credit and welfare reform, everything being moved online, and trying to be ahead of the game with stuff like that. We then developed the programme and the community hub, which Rory can give a bit more information on in a bit. But it encompassed drop-in sessions, one-to-one support. We developed a quite robust and quite diverse digital lending library that includes laptops, tablets, digital cameras, mobile phones. And we ran a series of classes and events as well, just to kind of increase the participation. We recognised very quickly that when we were developing this work, that we seemed to be the kind of lead organisation linking in with other partners. So we decided to develop the Govan Digital Forum. And the whole remit of the forum was to look at the resources, look at what people's skill sets were, look at where gaps in provision were, and try and develop a kind of overarching strategic approach to digital inclusion in Govan, and then encourage the organisations locally to sign up to SCVO's digital participation charter, so that we were the lead organisation, but everybody was kind of playing their role in terms of what they offered to their service users and where they could complement existing services.
Can I
That's been
interrupt
really
just for a wee
successful.
minute for folk, Ryan? Like, you know how you said you worked really closely with partners. I know who those guys are, but what kinds of organisations was it you were trying to sit alongside to sort of make it fit?
Yeah, I think just kind of similar to how we'd worked during the pandemic, it was looking at it thematically to say, well, who are the employability organisations working on the ground? Who are the organisations working with children and families? Who are the statutory organisations like the school and the police and the other housing associations, Glasgow City Council? It was looking at youth organisations who were engaging with young people and looking at online safety. And one of the projects Rory done in the school, which was fantastic, was looking at internet safety for parents. So the partners that we worked with and the people who kind of got involved in driving the forum was a very diverse range of local third sector organisations and some statutory bodies as well. And I think just, we having that background, the success of our digital programmes have been that they have been embedded into a wider community inclusion programme that encompasses lots of other themes. And we know that people that have maybe looked at isolated digital inclusion programmes and digital coffee mornings, etc., maybe found it difficult because of the word digital, and it's been just this standalone project. So I think that's where we had a lot of success in growing that. And it's been a very organic growth over the past couple of years, and especially with Rory then coming in and having that responsibility for taking it forward and leading on it. And when the pandemic struck, that meant, we were in a really good position in terms of digital engagement, diversifying how we engage with our tenants and service users. And I'm sure we'll cover this, but we kind of used our experience and some of the procedures that we had to support other organisations to develop their own digital lending libraries and their own digital programmes. So.
Yeah, which ties us neatly into Rory. Like, so you came into the project after Ryan was already there, getting it going. What did that look like when you came in? Because it sounds like you kind of, well, I know that you kind of came into the post and then were absolutely kind of delivering stuff immediately and running with different exciting bits of programs. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I suppose the landscape for me, and one of the conversations I have quite a lot with other housing associations, particularly people who are really interested in doing digital stuff, is how do you convince other people in the organisation to get involved and invest in it? And it was really bizarre for us because I came into a post where everyone had already bought into the idea. They had already funded and then hired me and knew the importance of digital inclusion. So there was no culture change within an organisation. Ryan had been in post for a year, probably about a year and a half before me. So he had some really strong connections to partners, but also had been doing a lot of the social stuff. And that's where a lot of the strength came in, as Ryan had mentioned, where we were doing some standalone digital stuff in terms of digital drop-ins and classes and working with the partnership to offer those things. But it was the digital by stealth. It was the having breakfast clubs where people were coming in and using the Wi-Fi and having a chat about their broken phone, or people coming in at the men's group and watching Netflix and talking about Spotify. Or we had a walking group where we would take cameras out and go to Finiston or to SWG3 and take pictures and things. And those sorts of relationships were already in place when I came in. So in some ways, the job was a breeze. I came in, people kind of knew who we were, what we were about. There was a space already there. Half of it was making Ryan tea, and then kind of moving on into other stuff. So, and to me, it was a joy because we were given the space to kind of invest in ideas and to test things out. We had really good relationships with tenants who were already telling us the kind of things they were interested in or things they had questions about. So one of the things that came very quickly when I came into post was that local banks were closing. So one of the first kind of standalone digital projects we did was people were going, if all the banks in Govan are closed, we have to go to Partick, and that means a subway ticket. And how does that work? So having to tell people about online banking, we got the banks to come in and do pop-up sessions and teach their customers from our community space. Yep. So it kind of it broke down those barriers a bit.
And I think that's what's really interesting. Obviously, I've been involved in digital inclusion forever, since flipping before iPhones, which makes me feel proper old. But I think it's that exactly what you said, Rory, that digital by stealth. So it's all very well offering up classes, and those are really, really important. But when you're really sort of working in the field of challenging digital inequality, it's about meeting people where they are. It's about holistic support. It's not just about chucking devices at things. It's about meeting people in context and kind of helping them wherever they appear. So I totally understand that model that you guys are talking about. And you can tell that you're in the woods. So you're sort of talking about the men's groups and the walking groups, and it's not just one thing. Digital kind of impacts on everything.
And it's sometimes finding that hook as well. I remember we've got a pensioners group on a Monday, and it's all women that come in. There's about 12 of them, I think, in total. And we've been trying to kind of sell the idea of doing some digital workshops and getting them iPads, and they go to creative arts classes. So we're saying, you can get the Apple Pencil and you can draw, and it was very slow to get them to use iPads and engage. And it was one of the sessions that I was sitting in with them, and they were kind of chatting about their wedding songs. And I went, Spotify. And I got Spotify up, and they were kind of naming what their wedding songs were and songs that they had kind of danced to at certain birthday parties and stuff. And they were just amazed that they could type in any song into this, database of music on Spotify. And I think that then slowly started to get them interested in doing that. And, they took part in some of the workshops that were delivered by Three and their communities team, and stuff that Rory and one of the local artists had done as well. So sometimes it's just about finding that hook in that setting. And then, that you're off and running with your devices.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I tout quite a lot about this job. I've been very fortunate that I'm both passionate about community work and digital, and it seems to be like a wonderful marrying of those two things. But the job would almost be the same if my job wasn't digital inclusion and it was around healthy eating, or if it was around inclusive dance, or if it was around whatever, because inclusive dance would have been hilarious.
I wish it was about inclusive dance.
But the process is as you say, is always the same. It's recognizing each other's as learners. It's not totem to be an expert in anything, and being presented with a problem and openly building a relationship with people and solving it together, as opposed to being a teacher. So and those sorts of practices around introducing things by what people are interested in and taking it to where they are is just very much CLD values.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably one thing that kind of really strikes you from the outside, looking at the work that's happening in Govan, is that both of you guys are CLD practitioners, which means that you're working from that basis as a starting point. And so you had all this kind of digital inclusion activity and community inclusion work happening pre-pandemic. And then suddenly it was March and everything was horrible last year. And I was just sitting crying in my living room, wondering what on earth was going to happen. And you guys just launched into it. So how did you see digital inequality, I guess, impacting locally? I guess let's start with that question. How did you see digital inequality impacting locally? How was that affecting folk? What did you experience at that point? And then we'll come on to and what did you do? Because obviously you did amazing stuff.
Sure. I think for me, the most difficult decision we made at the start of lockdown, actually before lockdown, because we had multiple conversations around keeping our tenants safe, keeping community members safe. The most difficult decision we made was to close the digital and community hub. And the impact of that is very much what we saw for the next couple of months, because the kind of three main things that those spaces provided were social inclusion, food provision, and digital inclusion. And we had some chaotic tenants. We had people who really relied on those services. We had people who just knew it was a place they could go and ask a question and you wouldn't see for a couple of months. And those kind of resources were gone, but not just for us, they were gone across Govan. Every third sector organisation made that decision at the same time to keep people safe by closing anything that involved face-to-face interaction before we were even told to. So we were already kind of having those conversations a week before we were all told to lock down, where we're like, we've had to close the hub. What are we going to do? Do you know?
Yeah, it was 2 weeks before we'd closed down, and then when the organisation decided that we were going to close for the start of the lockdown period, the first thing that they'd done was split the tenancy, split our stock into groups and give them to some of the staff to call round. And I think the feedback for that was that people were okay because it was quite new and it was quite early on. But as those conversations then developed over the coming weeks, you realised that people were struggling. They never really realised the extent of the isolation and what it was going to be like.
Yeah.
They never realised, how detached they can become if they can't leave the house. They probably realise, the connections they do have with some of the local community projects. And I think what Rory and I touched on a couple of weeks ago, just speaking about this, was that some of the service users then just disappeared and they were difficult to contact and they never had any connection online, and trying to get devices to them became very difficult. Some of our service users are recovering drug addicts or people who are living with addiction. So it's not a case of just phoning them up and saying, oh, we'll get you a device. There's a long drawn out process that's, maybe it can take 2, 3, 4 weeks just to get somebody comfortable with using technology as a platform to engage. So it was very difficult, I think, to make those assessments at the start. And I suppose when we chat a wee bit more about what we actually done, there was some kind of tricky decisions about, now that we've got all these devices, how do we distribute them in a way that's, one, fair, and two, that's actually manageable for us in terms of the level of support that's required, and how do we maximise the impact of those devices once they're out.
And I love it. See what you said there, Ryan, that you're also thinking, again, it's back to this, it's not just chucking devices out there, because you immediately go, we had to consider what extra support people needed, because it's not enough just to do that. So it's amazing actually building that into thinking, because what we've seen is that not necessarily being the experience everywhere, that it's going in with that wider package of support. So what did you do then? Who's taking that one?
I'll do that. But it was just on your previous point, I think this is again where the CLD thing comes in, because I think one of the things, Ryan and I spoke about this quite a lot at the start of this, is like Ryan and I have both been in youth centres and community centres where people have invested really heavily in something, a resource, and then it sits in a cupboard for 2 years, 3 years afterwards, because the funding for it went and people didn't really know how to use it, or it just kind of sits and gathers dust. So I always think about kind of community centres where you go in and there's like all these ovens and hobs and things, and it was because at some point there was a healthy eating fund that people had lots of money for and they're never used. So we were very clear about that. We wanted to invest in an area around digital, but also in the culture of using those devices. So I suppose in terms of actually the response, it came from, particularly in the immediacy, that immediate firefighting, trying to meet those needs of food provision, digital support, and social inclusion. So there was a really amazing partnership in Govan with the Salvation Army, Govan Youth Information Project, Katie from Make, Do and Grow, and some others who got together and had little small pockets of funding and pulled together to do a daily food collection point in Govan. So the Salvation Army van and others would come get hot food and collect some resources. So we kind of invested some staff time in terms of the Govan Housing Association had delivery drivers who went out and delivered to vulnerable tenants. We were very quick to kind of say, right, people are meeting in this area safely. How do we get digital access to those people? So We made sure that the Salvation Army food truck had Wi-Fi on it so that people could connect and use the data there if they needed to. We had a member of staff who, if anyone asked about data, could come get one of our lending library devices. And we started that kind of conversation around building support. And having that infrastructure in place at the start made everything massively easier, because we already had at least some conversation with some of the kind of shielding tenants, or people who were slightly more vulnerable, or people who were isolated because they were coming to the food truck and having those conversations with staff there. We had an idea of what was going on. And as Ryan had said, we also had staff doing welfare calls who were phoning people in, and as well as asking those questions like, you know, have you got COVID, or are you displaying symptoms, or do you have someone at home to help you? We were also asking questions like, do you know how to use WhatsApp, or do you have a means of communicating with someone else from another household? So we kind of had an idea then about what was going on and who needed what support. So we were in the midst of that, and very aware that we had to start thinking about medium-term planning, and we can't just be firefighting forever. We have to think about having some kind of holistic support in digital. Around the same time that the Connecting Scotland programme from Scottish Government and SCVO started. So we were asked very quickly if we could pilot the process for that, and how would that work? How would getting devices and data to tenants who were shielding work when you can't show them how the device works, and you also can't go around and give them the device. So so devices were shipped to myself. I set them up in my living room and used all the electricity and every extension plug I could find, and set up 15
the practicality of that. I mean, the practicality of that, because obviously we were in touch a lot during that period, and you had devices literally in every plug in the house. They were all coming to your house so that you could set them all up for the folk getting them.
At one point, I was really concerned my postman thought I was some sort of like into illicit activities, because I had about 40 SIM cards arriving at a time, and maybe he just thought I had loads of burner phones or something. But and our living room was just covered in tablets, constantly charging. We couldn't eat at our dining table because there was all these devices. So we were very, very quickly trying to figure out the logistics of that, and with support from SCVO, we were, you know, very conscious about the information that was coming out of COVID at the time, and contact, and how long something had to be sealed away for before it could be sent to someone else, and really navigated our way through that to get 15 devices to tenants who were totally offline, and also to have staff trained up and ready to support those people remotely. Because that's the other big frustration here, is that how do you teach someone how to use a device they've never seen when you're not there to show them what the buttons are? Because I think the thing I always harken back to is like the frustration I always had trying to explain to my mother how our printer works when she lives in another country. And like, you hit the button and she's like, there's about 1 million of them. So there was kind of building that confidence with staff as well.
It's hard, because one of the things that we found that I found really interesting is that point that you two made earlier about, I guess, learning alongside people. That's something we found, because we've never done digital inclusion support at distance either. You know, going like we're not sitting putting a hand on somebody's shoulder going, look, we'll do it together. We were having to do it, but at distance. And we found that folk receiving the devices felt kind of relieved that we'd be going, we've never done this like this before either. You tell me what you can see. And that kind of remote support, it weirdly was quite empowering for folk, I think. I don't know if you find that as well. Maybe not for staff. I don't know. What did you find?
I definitely found it was it helps that relationship where you're not claiming to be an expert. And I also think people find it quite funny when you get frustrated yourself. Like, you know, if they're trying to explain something to me and the app suddenly stops working, I express frustration at that, and people have a chuckle and we all go, what, you know, technology. So that does help, and it opens that door to other things that Ryan and I are always very aware of, is that it's a tool to kind of look at how to support people holistically. So you're talking about whatever it is around the technology, but you're also having wider conversations because you're waiting for something to load, or because you're waiting for something to turn back on and off again. So we found that definitely very impactful.
Yep. And what did you see in terms of the organisations that you were working with? How did they change their services to meet to meet the kind of the situation? Because I know that that was a challenge across the third sector and beyond, not just that, but you know, how did everybody sort of cope with that in your experience?
Do you want to take that one, Ryan?
I think just when we had looked at the procurement of 200 plus devices, I think actually when I worked it out the other week, it was around about 400 now. If you add up the devices that we already had that we distributed, the new devices that came in through the Connecting Scotland pilot, the new Connecting Scotland stuff, we've just procured another 20 devices with data as well. So it's about 400 devices. If you just give them to organisations to give out, then you know they're either going to be sitting under a desk or they go out and they never see them again. So we try to encourage organisations to kind of split it 70-30 and maybe go like 30% to people who need that support and who need that kind of assistance, so that you're not overwhelmed with 100% of your service users coming back to you every day, and the 70% getting out to people who you can almost guarantee you'll get your outcomes from, who'll be using it and who'll be staying connected and using it for kind of managing their money and tackling their kind of isolation, etc. So what we tried to do was split those organisations up again thematically, so that if this was going to be the first round and we could potentially access more devices, after the first round of giving out 200 plus devices, we would know exactly where they were best used, whether it was employability because people were losing their jobs, whether it was youth organisations because there was issues with antisocial behaviour or whatever it might be. So that gave us a bit of a kind of grasp on where the resource can best be put into. But what we did find was that there was a lot of organisations who had always thought about digital in terms of how they distributed information to tenants, but never really thought about it as a tool for engagement.
So, I get it.
So I think there's been lots of interesting conversations, I think, off the back of that, just in terms of potential training needs and where organisations can kind of build that capacity. And there's a couple of new roles in Govan that will help with that. The digital coordinator from yourselves, and we've just employed or just about to employ a new volunteering training coordinator who'll maybe tie a bit of that work up as well. But the feedback from organisations was amazing. I think that there was this kind of panic that was raised when there was they'd looked at where the gaps were and what the needs of the community were through the Thriving Places groups, and they said digital's a big one, but we don't really know how to do this. So they had approached the association to say, well, you guys have been leading on digital. Can you take this on? And we did, and it's been successful in terms of rolling that out and showing organisations, simple things like how to run a lending library, how to cleanse a device and get it back to somebody else, how to manage putting apps, etc., on each device. So at the moment, we're confident, just with feedback that I've asked for in the last couple of weeks, that all the devices are now out within the community with service users. Some of them that are Connecting Scotland devices are the individuals to keep, but the lending library model seems to be working pretty well across the board.
Well as well, yeah. And what do you think has been the biggest challenge to it with regards to digital? Is it staff skills? Is it the device recipient skills? Is it data poverty, or just resistance? Like what did you see?
Yeah, I think one of the things I really spent a lot of time trying to figure out, and I'm still spending a lot of time trying to figure out, is around data poverty. One of the when Ryan was talking about this 70-30 split, we had when we had piloted for Connecting Scotland, we had a lot of people who actually could use a device but just could not afford to run the data on a device. So we're using the device effectively for the data. Maybe had their own computers in the house but just didn't have internet, or people who just didn't know how to use either of those things, and the resource time split was totally different. But we had people like at the start there was this idea of giving people a set amount of data, 20 gigs for a month, and letting people manage that. But then in our conversations we were having with people, we were talking about how good YouTube is, or I was really obsessed with the Tiger King at the time on Netflix. So we were like 100%, yeah, I know, but 100% sure that we wanted to give every pilot person access to Netflix. So that was something we could talk about. So that 20 gigs is gone instantly. We had guys who were running through that data in 3 days, and then we were having to pay to top up. So that's not something that somebody who's never really invested in internet in their house, who's maybe going, I'll use my smartphone occasionally, but there's free Wi-Fi at Greg's and the subway and at the library, and I don't really need to pay that much.
Yeah.
People aren't ready for that sort of financial investment. So when we had looked at the kind of data provision, the economy of scale just doesn't match. So I'm maybe spending maybe £70 on one person's device to top up a 4G SIM card. And then we moved to unlimited data plans that were slightly cheaper, maybe £30 a month. But even that, when you speak about digital infrastructure and community Wi-Fi and offering free Wi-Fi to all tenants, the cost per person is a lot lower. It's just the capital is very high.
Yeah.
So we are, one of the things that's a challenge for me certainly is that this is showing a real drop in the ocean, that these 400 devices are providing internet for 400 people, but there are 1,800 people still in Govan potentially who potentially don't have internet at home, and we are looking to try and find ways of meeting that challenge.
And we've seen that, I mean, because obviously all the academic research points towards data poverty being an issue. You know, there's been loads of reports commissioned and done over the last few years, but I have never seen the impact of data poverty so kind of sharply drawn as it's been over the last 7-8 months, you know, where you know, the GP services are all online, the mental health support all online. The third sector has responded incomprehensibly well in delivering services through digital means. And these are support crutches that people really lean on. And without data, you can't access any of them. You can't access college courses. You can't, none of it. And so we knew it was there, but didn't realise, I guess, how much people leaned on free infrastructure that was there. You know, the colleges are a great example. The buildings are there with the free Wi-Fi throughout the building, access to the library. But when all of that's taken away, suddenly you've got loads of students who are in data poverty and unable to access data. I mean, we saw it. Every single third sector organisation I've been involved in over the last year has really highlighted how kind of how impactful the data situation is. And like you say, it's an ongoing cost that we've kind of got to absorb somehow.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I suppose was, I think for a lot of the third sector was that we were a victim of our own success, where we moved faster than infrastructure does. So when lockdown happened, the only reasonable internet package that people in lower incomes could afford was BT Basic. And you had to fill in tons of questions. You had to prove you were on job seekers. You had to, there was like a whole process for it before you could even get internet in the house. Whereas now on this side of lockdown, you see mobile phone providers who are saying, actually, we'll give you low cost, unlimited internet on your phone now, on your mobile phone for cheaper than it would be, but it's still a financial burden. But if that was here a year ago, that financial impact would have been significantly less, I would have thought. But we definitely saw there was lots of people like that, particularly at the start of lockdown when we were doing the food provision and the digital inclusion stuff, where we were getting texts and calls from colleagues or from tenants saying there's 5 or 6 people standing out in the rain in the library, outside the library, trying to use the Wi-Fi. Or Ryan and I were very aware that the digital hub and the community hub had free Wi-Fi, so we put signs up above the shutters saying, "Here's our Wi-Fi password," so people could just come to the shutter when we're not there and use it. And constantly seeing the same people and having conversations with them about, can we not support you to have data at home so you don't have to stand out in the rain?
Yeah. And I guess the impact on, we're all kind of really aware of the impact on children and families as well, with their education being accessed in that way as well. Because again, some local authorities had already sort of started looking at that kind of digital infrastructure. We're up in Highland, and that's one where we were already a bit ahead of the curve, but not in terms of data again. So it's sort of really tricky kind of managing that. And it was amazing seeing what you guys are doing, seeing the wider work of Connected Scotland's kind of recognising how significant that is. So in terms of going forward, where do we go from here? What do we need to do? How do you think things are going to change in the next wee while, or what are the kind of priority? Let's make it micro. So, Govan, what are you doing next?
Yeah, I think for us, we've always kind of tried to have that bit of a culture change where we start to think more about digital as an engagement tool, as a culture, in terms of it being embedded into how projects deliver services, whether it's housing associations, whether it's libraries and GP surgeries, etc. So, we've been banging that drum for a long time, and it's probably, one of the kind of, very few positives maybe to come out of this past year is that people now see the value of that. They see where the kind of economy of time comes into that, where it can save you time, it can save staff time, the immediacy of using digital to engage with people. So hopefully there'll be an opportunity to reflect on the things that we adapted and the things that we've done differently during the lockdown period, to kind of take that forward. The association, for example, looking at the money we've spent in the last 9 months on data, as Rory said, we'll be looking at a communal Wi-Fi model for Govan. Even prior to the lockdown, we were looking at that, and trying to kind of find that balance between very low capital outlay at the start and being able to manage the ongoing costs and absorb that as part of the association's kind of yearly finances. But also looking at other models where we can pay that massive capital cost at the front, maybe get that funded, and look at the ethos behind it being that every single property has got access to Wi-Fi, a very basic Wi-Fi, almost as a kind of human right as part of your tenancy, that it exists there, so that it's not a barrier, and that initial barrier that sometimes you do have when engaging in digital is people maybe don't want to get involved because of the ongoing cost. So if you can remove that part and you've got access to devices and access to free data, then you can maybe start to implement some of that kind of cultural change as well. And I think the association certainly kind of looking at adapting and changing and using digital tools to engage with your tenants now. So, for example, virtual viewings. So the amount of time that staff waste going to viewings of properties that never get taken because right away they look at it and go, no, I don't like the look of it. So we're piloting this idea of sending a short video or a 3D viewing option for each property. So it saves the staff member an hour of going to meet them at the property and doing a viewing when they don't take it. So it'll be exciting. I think that for me, there's definitely a wee kind of an exciting element to that in terms of how we start to implement that in our day-to-day working lives.
I guess it's so it's exciting, and also it's that kind of, I don't know, you said sort of basic Wi-Fi is a human right. It's that kind of that the importance of that agenda, I think, can't be underestimated. If you're going to be really addressing inequality, you need to make things sort of open to change and adapt the way you guys are talking about.
Yeah.
So and that's an amazing legacy, even looking at that. Sorry, Rory, what?
No, I was going to say one of the things that I'm very aware of, and Ryan and I have spoke with our in a team and with other partners and things for this for years, even you, Irene, is that it's hard to plan when you don't know what is going to be next in the kind of COVID environment, whether we're going to go steps forward or steps back. So one of the things that has certainly been a learning curve for us is to have medium-term planning and long-term planning, but also have plan A, B, and C, where if we move up the tiers, what does that mean in terms of the support we can provide? If we move back in the tiers, what do we provide in terms of support? So in an ideal world, we're looking at, we've got 400 tenants and residents in Govan who've now got devices, who have been maybe learning online but have other questions about how those devices work, and are able to meet together finally face to face because the lockdown's been lifted. And we need to have a plan in place for should that happen. But we also need to have a plan in place should restrictions get worse. I don't know how they would get worse, but if they did get worse, how would that work? And how do we support those people? And how do we do the medium term stuff where you can meet 2 people outside but not inside? And that's been one of the things that's been really good about the partnership. We were still trying to figure out, how can we meet people and support people when Glasgow Life were saying, actually, we've got tutors with 2 learners at socially distance, and we're running those classes every hour, high frequency, so that we can see a lot of people. And there's huge uptake from that. So it's about having that in the toolkit to go, right, we're in tier 3 and tier 2, so we can have this support package, or we're back into lockdown, so we go to this support package.
Yeah, and I think
just very quickly, sorry, I think just very quickly as well, I think something that we've spoken about, and I know that us 3 certainly have chatted about in terms of the work that we're doing in Govan, is during this COVID period, there's lots of money flying about, funders and the big lottery, the Scottish Government, the local councils, there's lots of money getting ploughed into communities, and I think we need to be smart about how we manage that. and that we try and incorporate an element of sustainability to make the most of this money that's coming in, to build those kind of foundations for some of the local projects and create that infrastructure that will allow us, once this money goes away, we don't want this kind of digital culture to kind of leave with it. We want to have that embedded in to projects for the years to come.
And I think you guys work really well in the sort of making sure that the inequality isn't just replicated in the skills. So if everybody in the whole of Scotland had device and data, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't still carry on replicating inequality. But what you guys are doing is absolutely going, no, it's not just this. We have to keep on this journey. It's not something we're just going to stop. So you're doing a power of work there with the partner organisations, the third sector organisations there, helping them upskill and helping those guys that are providing that really meaningful support work, helping them take the people they support on that journey as well, so that we're all kind of working together on that. And I think that's, I guess, really all of what you're doing is just the most incredible legacy. Except it's not really a legacy, is it? It's just what we're doing next in the chaos of our lives now.
It's one of the things I like about the kind of Govan story, if it was to be such a thing, is that we're only really one. I know. We're really only one actor in that, and that there is a big partnership of people and other organisations who are doing amazing work, and we are all kind of having these conversations at the same time because we're being thrown up with the same challenges. And instead of, maybe in other areas, I'm not too sure, but instead of trying to look internally and figure it out for ourselves, we're looking to each other and supporting each other and supporting other organisations in ways that we potentially wouldn't have done before the lockdown, so that we are on the same journey.
You're such goodies. You're such goodies. And look, I mean, we have managed to fill up 45 minutes. Who would have thunk it?
Not bad.
And I've started getting a few questions on my little WhatsApp group here. So we've got here is one of the questions that's come in is, for older people, the idea of online banking can be more than just digital inequality. It's about a loss of a way of life. And I guess, do you think this needs more support than just digital, that kind of change in environment? And do you see yourself as part of that?
I suppose one of the things we were very aware of, and I'm sure the banks were as well, in that first, maybe it was 3 years ago when banks and government started closing, was that it wasn't just about the access to finances, it was the personable social element of it. It was the routine that people had built in, and it was in some ways a community anchor. It was, we certainly spoke to some of our pensioners group who would go to their bank and go, is this fraudulent? Because a bank would know if something was fraudulent. So it's not necessarily about the online skill. We certainly, I remember having a conversation with our pensioners group when I first started naively, and was saying, we could look at online banking, and one of the ladies was like, Rory, if I did online banking, I'd never leave the house. If I did online shopping, I'd never leave the house. Do you know what I mean?
That social thing, yeah.
I think that's definitely part of it. And I think one of the things that I hope coming out of this whole lockdown process and restrictions process is that digital is a tool for social inclusion, but it isn't social inclusion. And you see that a lot with the kind of online learning landscape and schooling and stuff, where they're saying that online learning is a stopgap, but we need to be meeting together and learning together and speaking together. So I would hope that would still come.
I think we've got a kind of an example of that, where we're chatting about one of the things when the lockdown's finished, what's going to be a barrier is potentially building the confidence for people to get out the house and engage in projects again. And one of the local projects is called Creative Steps, and they've got over 250 people on their caseload. But their project is about engaging with people with kind of health issues that are constantly going to their doctor, constantly in and out of hospital. And it's about engaging them in art activities and social activities to try and reduce that time and increase their health outcomes. But what's happened now is they've gave all the group devices. Most of them are sitting at home going, well, actually, I don't need to leave the house now. I can just take part in this from home. So it's maybe undoing some of the work that's been done in the past. And I think when we've spoke at digital events and we've sat with colleagues across the sector, I think the important thing that I think we always have to reiterate is that digital isn't always the answer. And sometimes it can be exclusive if you don't still incorporate those face-to-face and the paper type stuff as well. But certainly with things like the pensioners group, there are some who have started using kind of like digital technology and online banking, and maybe it is about getting them out of the house and getting to the shops, but it's also about being able to say, well, this one day when it's snowing and you can't get to the bank, you do know that you have that choice, and here's the skills to be able to do it from home as well, rather than a means to an end. It's it's an option for them when they can't actually get out.
That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
it's one of the things I've certainly talked. It's one of the things I definitely tout a lot is that, and we've spoke generally in terms of housing practice and things, is digital by choice as opposed to digital by default.
Yeah.
So making sure that people can apply for houses online, but that's not the main way that you apply for housing or the only way to apply for housing. That people have that choice because it either benefits their lives or they go, no, that's not for me. I think that's okay.
I think that's absolutely right, that people can maintain that agency in that. Another question that's come up that kind of ties into the discussion we've just had around older people was, do you have intergenerational work in terms of digital? So digital intergenerational work happening in the community? Is anyone doing that at the moment?
So there are a couple of organisations, particularly when we were seeing people before lockdown borrowing our community lending library. Part of that purpose was around intergenerational. So I know Govan and Linthouse Parish Church were doing that sometimes, and so were Govan Youth Information Project. One of the things that I was really involved in before lockdown and still haven't quite managed to figure out how we pick up now was we had been working on a digital champions in schooling project. So we were working with 2 of our local primary schools to identify young people who are really passionate about technology and building their digital skills so that they could teach their classmates, but also move towards intergenerational work. So we had these hilarious sessions where I'm having to explain to children what a floppy disk is and why it's the save icon. And I had a young person tell me that he thought I'd 3D printed the save icon so that it was a thing. And I'm like, no, it used to be a thing. Do you know that sort of conversation where you're going, or we had brought in typewriters and people are going, how do I delete the letters? And you're going, well, that's not what that technology was. So we have had these conversations. We were building the confidence of children to go do that. And we had certainly identified some sheltered housing units that were interested. But then lockdown happened, right? As we were starting to kind of move forward with it again. And and we've never been able to pick up the ball since.
Yeah, that is a tricky one. That's tricky at distance. Sorry, Ryan.
I think something that's worth noting just for people that are listening is this has come up quite a lot in some of the national conferences that I've kind of attended, and it's the definition of intergenerational. We always think about it being young kids teaching old people, but actually, if we're working with pensioners, that is still intergenerational. Our digital champions who are of our age or our generation doing that and supporting is still intergenerational. So sometimes the definition gets lost when we think about it being, kids in primary school working with pensioners, but that can be us supporting kids. That's still intergenerational, and us working with kind of elderly pension age people is intergenerational as well. So there's probably lots of that by definition happening.
I was worried where you were pointing there because I thought you were insinuating that you and I are from different generations for a while.
Babyface Brown.
He's only a couple of years older than me. I know. He's only a couple of years older.
But I think that's a really good point because there's lots of sort of really brilliant sort of mentoring projects and stuff out there that really rely on a smaller distance in terms of ages and what we mean by generational. And a lot of those mentoring support organisations have really done fantastic up and down sort of support in terms of digital as well. So it's good to kind of flag that up. Another wee question that's come in is, do you think digital inequality will be less of an issue in Govan and surrounding areas in the next 5 years? To put a time frame on it.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it will be. I think the fact that, I don't think it's going to go away in the next 5 years. I think the fact that the work that's been done during the pandemic, the approach that we've taken, the data that we'll have at the end of this period, I think the fact that we've identified digital inequality, the fact that we've increased the number of people that are participating, some of the barriers that we can potentially remove, I think that there will be a lot, in 5 years' time, I'd like to think that, at least 60% of our tenants will feel less digitally excluded and more included in terms of what they can engage in and what their skill set and their knowledge is. And I think that the big thing for us in terms of tackling the inequality is looking at this communal Wi-Fi model. One of the arguments we've had with some of our seniors is about, oh, we don't think this is going to work. We've spoken to people where they've tried it before and it hasn't worked. So we've got this provider that's going to offer us 100 free, and they reckon that will be better. But for us, it's about the value that underpins it is about it being equal. It's about equity. So every single property has it, not just selected ones that are more willing to engage. So I think if we're starting to look at it as a model that is in every single property, so then you have the choice. It's digital by choice, where you can then phone up the housing association and say, right, okay, I've got my Wi-Fi in. What do I do next? How do I engage with some of the projects? How do I get a device? And we're looking at other projects to recycle second-hand devices. We're looking at a donation scheme. If we increase the lending library, potentially we can rotate that round. There's different approaches where you can look at maybe one close, having 2 or 3 devices that can be shared and utilised within common spaces, etc. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done. But I think the groundwork that's been done over the last 5 years, and in particular this kind of culture change with some of the partners, it gives us a really, really good opportunity to grow and develop that further and make headway on tackling digital inequality over the next 5 years.
One of the things that
the optimistic bunny there.
One of the things that I totally agree with Ryan in terms of infrastructure and things, but you had mentioned the words earlier on about agency and about how people in Govan practice their own agency, and that's one of the things I'm very aware of if we start to look at infrastructure and access, and it's part of the reason we started talking about a community-run communal Wi-Fi program as opposed to looking at some infrastructure that's brought in from a massive national grid type thing, shall not be named. But that sort of idea of people being able to have access to internet, but on their terms, and understand what happens to their data and to the information that's collated on their behalf, and the cost and what happens with that money, because otherwise it's in some ways very disempowering to just say, right, you've got internet now.
Yeah.
And you're not having those conversations about how people's internet is being mined, how that's being farmed out to other organizations, and how people understand how communities are operating. And I think that's a conversation that communities need to have as well. And hopefully what happens as part of this process in these 5 years is that we're building the confidence and the capacity for people to use their own agency.
Yeah.
And what works really well and what works really well in Govan, just to kind of add on to that, Rory, is when one person gets that service and they make the most of it and something positive happens and they get a device, they tell everybody. That kind of word of mouth thing, like when we started giving out mobile phones, just very basic mobile phones to vulnerable people that were, didn't want a device but could manage a mobile phone to keep in touch with social workers, etc. But word spread really quickly that was a service that was on offer and that they could get access to that kind of support. So I think hopefully over the next couple of years, that the more people we engage with and the more people we support, that they're then able to, encourage other people to get involved and take part. And like Austin Stratton, one of our tenants, brilliant young guy, he has been sharing his Wi-Fi modem with the person next door, just because he knows they've not got any Wi-Fi. So it's things like that really inspires us and goes, what, maybe we're on the right path and we'll get there. We'll get there eventually.
I think you're really kind of well on the way. It's always been amazing to work with you guys because of that kind of level of commitment that you've got. The fact that you're tackling it from all angles. You're tackling it from the ground up strategically, and really sort of really passionate, I guess, about what you're doing and seeing the impact that it has. I guess we are just about out of time just now, so I would just very much like to thank you both for giving up more of your time to hang about with me on video call, as if we don't see enough of each other through the week. It's been great to talk to you and to talk about the amazing stuff that you're doing in Govan, and long may it continue. Thank you both very much indeed.